I'm Robert Sumwalt. I'm a board member with the NTSB. We have Michael Hiller is the investigator in charge, and Eric Weiss, who is the public information officer, public affairs officer for the NTSB on this accident. We will be referring to this diagram as we go today. And just to give you a clue, of course, this is the front car of the Metro North train 659. So this is the leading rail car the other night. We can see, of course, we've got the engineer's compartment up here, up front, and the exits, the side passenger doors, the restroom, which we'll talk about in a moment. What I think is, what I'd like to say is that there were 12 pieces, 39-foot sections of the third rail that had penetrated and ended up in this rail car. The point of penetration was approximately right here below this passenger, below this side passenger door. So we'll be referring to that as we go along. Yesterday at this time, I mentioned that we had just finished up the engineer's interview, and I only was able to get one tidbit of information before I came in because that interview had just concluded. Today I'd like to give you the details of what we found from that. The engineer was hired by Metro North in 2010. He was hired as an electrician. He transferred to become a locomotive engineer, where he was trained, promoted, and qualified as an engineer in March of 2013. He was qualified on all three Metro North lines, and he operated this particular line, the Harlem line, about 3 times a week. Harlem line? Is that right? Yeah. Sorry, I was just all of a sudden. He went on duty at 9:37 on Tuesday morning, the accident morning. He had operated 3 previous trains that morning, and this was his 4th run of the day, and this was scheduled to be his last leg of the day, the last trip of the day. Before leaving Grand Central Terminal, he had made all required pre-trip inspections, which would include testing the horn, the headlights, and the radio. He described the departure from Grand Central as being a normal departure. As required, he performed a running brake test to verify that the brakes are in fact going to work. He performed his running brake test, and he said he noted no exceptions to any controls, and he noted no handling problems with the train. This was an express train, which of course means limited stops. It had only had one stop prior to the accident, and that stop was at Chappaqua. As he approached the crossing, he said he initially saw a reflection at the crossing, and soon thereafter, he realized that it was the front end of a vehicle that was on the track. He immediately put the train into emergency braking, and then he saw the car advance fully onto the track. He said he realized that it was a woman in the car, in the automobile, but he could not see anything else. He noticed that the car then disappeared underneath him, went out of his line of sight. He felt the collision. He did not recall hearing any explosion. He did say he noticed sparks, but he did not realize that the third rail had penetrated his car at this time. The train came to a stop. He immediately began getting smoke in the engineer's operating compartment. He got on the radio and stated, "Emergency, emergency, emergency." And he said that they had struck a vehicle. Because his control compartment was filling rapidly with smoke, he exited the compartment, came out, and he saw fire in the rear part of this first rail car. And he was able to say with definitiveness that it was the rear part of the car because he stated that it was behind the bathroom. He said there was heavy smoke and the fire was moving very quickly towards the front of the train. He assisted with evacuating 5 or 6 passengers. When smoke got too dense, he exited the train through this door right here. He saw a passenger who was crawling towards that door. He was standing outside the door when he saw this passenger moving towards him. The passenger could not walk, so he picked the passenger up, grabbed him, held him in a fireman's pose, and turned around and carried and held and handed him to an emergency responder. He said that he tried to go back into the car to rescue someone else, but he was unable to do so because of the fire. Our investigators described his demeanor as very professional. And I think it goes without saying that he's very traumatized. We also did this morning, we interviewed the conductor. The conductor was hired by Metro North in 2007, and he became a conductor in 2008. He was in the 6th car of the 8-car train at the time of the collision. He said he heard and felt the emergency brake application. He radioed the engineer and was told that they had hit a car, struck a vehicle on the tracks. And so in accordance with his training, he made a PA announcement to tell the passengers that they had struck a vehicle on the tracks to please remain calm and stay on board the train and wait for further instructions. He then radioed the dispatch center of their location. He, in accordance with his training, he walked to the rear of the train, walking through cars 7 and 8, checking on passengers. And when he got to the last car was positioned pretty much over the grade crossing. So there, standing outside the train, was an emergency responder. The decision was made to evacuate the train. After the train was being evacuated, as people were leaving, he walked forward, checking to ensure that all the passengers had successfully evacuated. When he got to the 3rd car, emergency responders advised him to get off the train himself. He said he stayed on the train until he was assured that all the passengers through all the cars that he had walked through, 8 all the way down through number 3, had been evacuated. He described the evacuation as going in an orderly manner. That was his words. Last evening, we provided preliminary information from the event recorders. Today, we'll try to provide a little more granularity of what we found. Last evening, we said the train was traveling 58 miles per hour when it went into emergency braking. About 4 seconds after the train went into emergency, it struck the SUV. The speed at the collision, 48 miles per hour. The train traveled approximately 650 feet after striking the SUV. In addition to the event recorders, the locomotive event recorders or the train event recorders, the train also has maintenance recorders. And the maintenance recorders provide information about when third rail voltage is being applied to the train. So that will be a source of information for us. And we were also correlating what we're getting off of those train maintenance recorders as far as third rail voltage to the train. We're correlating those data with the data acquisition unit information that we're getting from the power substations, the substations that provide power to the third rail. And the whole purpose of this, determine precisely when the third rail was de-energized. And the preliminary information from that is showing that the circuit breakers opened immediately after the accident, and also personnel at the dispatch center sent an open command to ensure that the third rail voltage was de-energized. We're in the process of, we're continuing to collect information, and one of the things we were able to do today is start to learn information about the driver of the SUV. We know the driver held a valid driver's license. We're told that the accident location was not along her usual route from work. The car was a 2011 Mercedes ML350. The car was registered in December of 2014. This vehicle had an electronic gear shift selector. And in December 2014, there was a New York State inspection conducted of the car, of the automobile, and we have requested those records. Today we started 3D laser scanning activities. This will allow us to create virtual models of what we're looking at. We can create virtual models, so after the train cars, after we leave here, we can still go back and basically take measurements as if we were standing in those cars and look at things from different points of views. So today we began the activities of 3D laser scanning of the interior of the car, of the number one rail car, the exterior of that rail car. We'll also be doing that scanning of the number two position rail car. We'll be scanning the SUV, the grade crossing itself, and this will take several days to do. This will be our last on-scene press briefing. Just because this is our last on-scene press briefing certainly does not mean that the investigation is concluding. In fact, it's just the other way around. We are just in the very beginning stages of the investigation. There's a lot that needs to be done, but yet there's a lot that has been done. Our investigative team will continue to stay another several days collecting information, and then they will go back to Washington and continue the investigation. But the on-scene phase will continue several more days. This will just be our last on-scene press briefing. Media inquiries from this point forward will be handled through our Washington, D.C. press office. Be glad to take a few questions, and as we've done in the past, I appreciate your cooperation. Would like to ask that you raise your hands. I'll call on you, and when I do so, if you don't mind, state your name and your affiliation. And let's see, back here in the corner. From the information that we provided last night, as soon as he realized it was a car, he placed the train into emergency braking. And so that's really what we know. So we know exactly when the train was placed into emergency, and we know how long it took the train to stop. We know where the point of collision was. So it's going to be, we are going to create a timeline of everything that happened in this event to help us to put it together. Yes, sir, Mr. Costello.
Thank you. Tom Costello with NBC. When we were out there today, we all noticed that there was no audible warning, no bells going off at the railroad crossings. Does that concern you? How will that play into your investigation if perhaps she wasn't able to hear an audible warning that a train was coming?
The question is, there are no audible warning bells at this grade crossing, and in fact that's true. By regulation, this grade crossing is not required to have bells because there is no pedestrian walkway there. The bells are required when we have pedestrian walkways. One of the things that we will be doing is conducting, in addition to a sight distance test, we will also be conducting audio test to determine how far down the tracks a train horn can be heard. We do know that the engineer sounded the standard grade crossing cadence in accordance with procedures. We know that after he put it into emergency, he sounded the horn for 4 seconds. We know that. And we also know that from the time he placed it into emergency to the point of collision was about 4 seconds. So that's sort of sounding like he sounded the horn all the way up to the point of collision. But we will be conducting an audio test, and we will be determining, part of our investigation will be to see if putting bells on other grade crossings would improve safety. So that's one of the many things that we will look at. So question here. Yes, sir.
Yes, Peter, describe
I'll take the first one. I'll take the last part of that first. Are the crew members absolved of any wrongdoing? And I want to point out that the NTSB is here to collect facts, and we do not determine liability or fault. We don't assign blame. We conduct a thorough investigation. We determine the facts, circumstances, and conditions surrounding that, and then we determine probable cause. So that's what we will do, but we are not here to conduct any analysis or conjecture at all. That's not why we are here on scene. We're here to collect the perishable information. That's the information that goes away with the passage of time. The end of the investigation will determine what the probable cause of the accident was. What was the first part of your question? How would I characterize the crew members' actions once the collision took place? We've collected facts on that. We will not be determining anything concerning their actions. That will be part of the investigation. We want to collect it, analyze it, and that's what we will do in the process of the investigation. So question right here, sir. You want to know what we learned from the event recorders that we talked about yesterday about the. Okay. About what precisely? I'm sorry. Yes, the speed of the track was moving down. The train was moving down the track. Track number 2, moving down the track, 58 miles per hour. Once the engineer placed the train into emergency, of course the brakes kick in and the train is going to start to decelerate. And by the time the collision occurred, which is about 4 seconds later, the speed had decreased to 48 miles per hour. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I hope that's what you were looking for. Okay, there's a question here in the back. No, so let's talk about the third rail. Each of the third rail sections is 39 feet long. So as the train is moving along, the third rail is being ingested by the moving train. So you can do the math on that to figure out 12 times 39 to figure out how much of the third rail was being ingested. So there were 12 pieces of 39-foot sections inside the first rail car. Alan Levin. Question is, where were the rails? Where were they ending up in here? And that's going to be part of our evidence, part of our documentation. With the 3D laser scanning, we'll be able to say exactly where they were. I was in the rail car today, and I can tell you that there is extensive fire damage inside the car, and the third rails are scattered throughout, and they are sort of stacked up, beginning on the floor. Some are going all the way up to the ceiling level, and there's one that came all the way up through and exited this car and went across the top, the gap here between the two cars, and penetrated into rail car number 2. There's a question here. The question is, what is the minimum distance from the track to the crossing guard? And I don't have that information right away, but that's information that we can get. I can't comment on what that distance is. Go ahead with your question. You know, again, I want to emphasize we're here to collect information, and we can, the perishable information, the length of that car is something we can go on the internet and look up in 2 weeks. It's not information. We've got people here that are going out and just trying to document this perishable information, so we're not going to concern ourselves at this point in trying to do the math about how much space was in that crosswalk. Well, yes, I said that earlier. It's a 2011 ML 350. So, okay, got a question. All right, I got you twice yesterday, so we're going to come here. What type of factors or conditions could have allowed that third rail to be ingested by the rail car? Again, that's analysis, and we will figure out the crash dynamics as as far as how that could occur. As I described on the first day, the third rail entered into the SUV, of course, on the left side, about where, if you had a rear seat passenger, about where the rear seat passenger would be seated behind the driver. So if you're looking at I think I pulled out these cards the other day and made them into a car. But the driver's seat is here. The third rail would have come in behind the driver's seat, sort of at an angle. And by the time it had come through the other side, it's now on top of the right rear tire. So the trajectory is in an upward trajectory. It then came and hit the trucks, the wheels that are underneath here, and those are nice and solid wheels, and that helps continue the trajectory in an upward fashion so that finally it penetrates right about here and enters into the cabin. Okay, last question, right here.
You know, specifically, it's not generally where the victims were sitting, information was prior, and any facts pertaining to fire location as opposed to the front. The car was struck in the front, the rails were in the front. Is there anything other than car gasoline that's been found that could cause explosion with which the city engineer said he saw fire first way like that?
A lot of question there. Pete wants to know where the passengers were seated, wants to know what could have literally sparked a fire. And so we will create a diagram to the best that we can. So sometimes people get on trains and they move, just like sometimes people sit on airplanes and they move after the door is shut. But we will try our best to figure out and determine where people were seated and then match that up with their injuries. That's one thing we'll do. What could have sparked this fire? Could it have been gasoline from the automobile? Could it have been some other source of spark? We hope to be able to determine that. That's analysis, and that's going to be part of the investigation. I want to close it out just by saying thank you all, and